Hi, this is Julie with Beadaholique, and today I want to show you how to cover a brass cuff with suede and do a decorative beaded edge around the outside to give it a finished, polished look. So these cuff bracelets are great. They're very sturdy. You can bend them a little bit, so what I want you to do before you start this project is try it on your wrist and bend it to the shape and size that you want. You will be able to bend it still after we do this, but it is better to just start off by bending it. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this lovely suede and cover the bracelet. So to do this, first see if there's a right and wrong side to your suede. On this one you can tell that there is, or at least I'm going to choose the lighter color side to be on the outside. So it's a little fuzzier. Now if you're not going to do any type of stitching on the top side, like a decorative bead embroidery stitch or something like this where I am going to stitch on a decorative focal point, then this is what you're going to do. If you just want to cover the bracelet like this with suede paper, and at the very end I'm going to go back and show you how you can do something like this where you do some stitching ahead of time on the top side. So to begin, we are just going to guesstimate how much we're going to need. So take the edge of your cuff, start it here, carefully walk it down to the other side, and then cut yourself about a ½ inch beyond where you feel you need it. Now, I want to make sure I have about a ½ inch on either side of the edges here of this cuff bracelet, and so I'm going to rough cut it down. And here's a little tip: you can go ahead and fold this in half once you make your first cut so that you can have a nice even cut, or at least somewhat even. We're going to trim this up, so don't worry too much about how perfect this looks. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to glue this to the inside first. So I've got some Crafter's Pick glue, and what I'm going to do is you can just open up the cap and squeeze some on your finger, but I'm going to want quite a bit. And you can also use a toothpick or a piece of wire as an applicator, but I like to use my fingers. If you've seen me do other videos, you'll realize that. It's a little quicker for me. All right, so I'm going to get some glue, and I'm going to put it directly onto the brass, and I'm just going to coat the entire underside. I don't want so much that it's going to squish out the edges when I attach my suede, but I do want it to go all the way to the edge, and I want there to be enough on there to adhere my suede. So that looks good to me. I'm going to make sure that I have the right side facing me. So remember, one side was a little darker on this particular one. And I'm just going to go ahead, put that in there to the well, and just press into place. And this is why you want to cut extra, because you don't want to have to worry that you're cutting it too close. You just want to be able to pretty generously just put the glue on the back side and then put the suede on top. So I'm going to go clean my finger off, and I'm going to let this dry, and then I'm going to trim it. After you've let this dry, I'd let it dry for about 20 minutes. You're going to go ahead and trim it. To do that, just take your scissors and cut about a 1/16 of an inch from the edge of the brass. Now I actually have found that sometimes it's easier to go from a different angle depending on if you're right or left-handed. So feel free to move your piece around, whatever works best for you, but try to keep the width that you're creating along the edge equal. So all the way around your entire bangle, you want to keep that same amount of space. And it doesn't have to be exactly a 1/16 of an inch or an 1/8 of an inch. It's whatever you like, but be consistent. And if you end up with a little notch like that, just trim it off. When you feel like you're all done, go ahead and just inspect the piece. Make sure that there's no notches or rough edges. All right, now we're going to do the top side. So for the top side, I've cut another piece, which I can tell is already going to be plenty big. If you don't want to use so much suede, you can go ahead and be a little bit more precise. I just like to err on the side of caution. It makes it a little bit easier for me. So to do this one, I do the same thing. I'm going to take some glue and put it on my finger. Again, you can use a toothpick or whateve you like. I've just always used my fingers. And I'm going to put this directly onto the brass. I'm going to be a little bit more careful this time because I don't want to get any onto the suede, which has already been applied. Actually go ahead and hold it like this. That sometimes makes it a little bit easier. You can see how I'm grabbing it. Okay, again, I'm going to find which is the right side. I can see this one here is a little bit more texture to it. It's a little greener. And I'm going to lay it on top and just smooth it out. Flip it over, and now I'm going to take my clean fingers and just press it into place. Make sure there's no gaps or air bubbles, and now I'm going to let this side dry for about 20 minutes before I trim it up, the same way I trimmed up the other one. I'll show you how to do that as soon as this is dry. It's been 20 minutes, so now I'm going to trim this side, and the way you're going to do this is you're going to, let's see if you can see this on camera. I'm going to follow the edge line of the first piece of suede, and I'm just going to cut that so it's equal. Okay, I want you to see what this looks like. You can tell that in between the two pieces of suede, we have the brass cuff sandwiched there, and you can tell that there is a nice little lip that's going to make it so that we can stitch into it, because if we cut it right directly up against the brass cuff, we'd have no place for our needle and thread to go. So I'm going to keep trimming this, just following the line of the first piece of suede. Go ahead and inspect your piece again. Make sure nothing stands out as being too jagged or off. If there is anything, just trim it up. All right, and now we're ready to go ahead and stitch a decorative edge along the outside perimeter to make this look finished, and that's what we did here. And I did a basic beaded edge here. I'm going to show you how to do that. Now we have a couple of other videos from Beadaholique.com showing you how to bead embroider a basic beaded edge and also how to bead embroider a picot edge, and either one of those edges would look great on a bracelet like this. And I'm going to show you both. So I'm just going to go ahead and put out some 11/0 seed beads. I'm not going to tie a knot on my end. You're probably going to have to stop your thread at some point and thread a new piece. I personally am not comfortable working with more than about 6 feet of thread at a time, and it took me about 2 lengths of 6 feet of thread to finish this larger one. So to begin, I don't have a knot tied at the end. I'm going to pick up a single bead onto my needle, and then I'm going to start at any place along the edge of my cuff, but not in a curve. A curve is going to be harder to create a nice fluid look when I finish my piece. So I'm just going to start about 1/2 inch in along the side, and going from what is the top side to the back side, I'm going to go through both pieces of suede, pull my needle and thread through, and then I want to leave a tail of at least 6 inches, because at the very end I'm going to go back and thread another needle onto this to finish off the piece. So now I'm going to go back up through that bead I just strung. And if you can hold your tail, that does help a bit. And pull down. Now you can use a green thread for this if you don't want the threads to show, or you can do what I'm doing here for the video where I'm using a black thread so you can see what's happening. So now to continue along, I'm going to pick up another bead. Again, go from the top side to the back side, pull through, and then go back up through the bead you just strung. And you want these to rest along the top of the edge. So help them along. Once you get a few on here, they're going to stay in place where they need to. It's just in the beginning, since we don't have a knot, we need to guide the thread and the beads a little bit. I'm going to show you that again. So we're going through both layers, and we're going from the top side to the back side and pulling through. Then we're going to go back up through the bead we just strung, and pull. Now here is a basic beaded edge, and that's what I've done here. But let's say you want to do a picot edge. Very easy to modify this. So instead of just stringing one bead, we're going to string two, and I'm going to alternate the color here a little bit. So I'm going to put on this nice olive green and pink tone bead, and then another one of my darker beads. And with those two beads on my needle, I'm going to go the same method through the top side, through to the back, making sure I go through both layers of the suede, pull through. Now I'm not going to go back through both beads, I'm just going to go back through the last bead, which is that darker bead, and pull. Now if your thread does this, which mine tends to do a bit, especially in the beginning when I have a lot I'm working with, just kind of work it out. Most times it's not actually a knot, it just gets a little bit tangled. And see what we've done now is we've trapped that little lighter colored bead up top, and it's going to create a little ruffled edge. I'm going to show you that one again. So we're going to do two beads. We're going to do a lighter colored and a darker colored. Go through both layers, and then go up through the last bead you strung, which is the darker colored one in this case. I'm going to do that one more time, and then you're going to be on your own to bead along the entire edge. So I want to show you what this looks like from the back. You can see my stitching, and then this is what it looks like from the front. And as you go, you can choose if you do want to even create a decorative look where you do create rather wide stitches as far down as you can go to reach your cuff. Or in this one here, I did very shallow little stitches so you didn't even really see the thread. So go ahead, finish beading all the way around your cuff, and then I'm going to show you how to finish this off. I've almost finished beading all the way around, and I decided to go with the picot edge for this particular project. So I wanted to add my few last beads with you watching so you can see what I do. So I'm going to pick up my two beads. This is the same process I've been doing all the way along. I'm going from the front to the back, going through all the layers and pulling, and then I'm going to go back up through the last bead. And when you get to this very last bead that you're adding, you'll have to decide if you really do have room to add the bead, or if you're just going to need to pull your threads tight enough that the previous bead gets pulled a little bit closer to the first set of beads you strung. As you're working, you'll be able to gauge that better. So I've completed the entire circumference, and now I just need to add one more little bead for my picot edge. So I'm actually going to go then down through what was the very first bead I strung. I've got the tail I'm holding back here. This was the tail we originally started with. So I'm going to go down through it and pull. And I was actually surprised. I was able to get all my beadwork done with my 6 feet of string, which was a nice, pleasant surprise. So now that I've got this down here, I'm going to take my needle off of my thread, and I'm going to thread it back onto my tail. Remember, we said we needed to leave enough of a tail that we could put a needle back on it, and that's what I'm doing here. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through that last picot edge bead and pull, and then go down through the darker bead next to it. And now you can see that my threads are side by side. So what I'm going to do is you can leave the needle on or you can take it off because you're still going to need to work with it. I'm going to tie a simple knot. And then I'm going to tie a surgeon's knot. So I'm going to go over, under, and pull. And that creates a nice, neat little knot in my beadwork. And now I'm just going to take my needle with the thread and weave my existing thread up into the beadwork a little bit, just tracing along the path I already beaded. And when you've done that a few times, you can go ahead and take your thread zapper and just zap off that thread. There we go. And then you're going to go ahead, put your needle back on your other tail end and do the exact same thing and weave it into your work. So I want to show you an example here of a before and after. This was the original brass cuff that we started with, and here's the finished one. So you can see we actually added quite a bit of width to the bangle itself. And then this does just slide on the wrist very nicely still. And as I promised you in the beginning, I'd show you how you could go ahead and do some stitching on the top side and still use this technique. So all you're going to need to do if you want to do something like that is cut your piece, like remember how we rough cut it. And then what you're going to do is on the back side, before you do any stitching, you're going to take your brass cuff and use it as a template. And I just actually took a regular old pen, I just drew a line around it, and then I walked it down at even intervals. I just made little notch marks just to see where this was going to lay. And I did that all the way, and then I actually measured myself a center point as well. And then I was able to see where I was going to want to stitch on any type of embellishment. And this little one here, I just stitched it. You can see I just stitched it directly onto the suede and down through. And then what I would do is I would then tie this off, and then when I glued my brass cuff, I would make sure that I glued it within the lines that I started with. So that's all you need to do if you're going to do any type of stitching. That's one way of doing it. I know there's several different ways out there, but that's one way I find to be really very easy to make sure that your beadwork lays where you want it to lay. So that is how you cover a brass cuff using suede with a decorative beaded edge.